We are just weeks away from the fantasy football season officially starting. We are giving you some updated wide receiver rankings for the year in PPR formats. Do us a favor. Go ahead and drop a like to show some love. We have a like goal of 100 likes. Can you help us get there? With your help, I think we can maybe get there. Subscribe if you like fantasy football because we're going to be pumping out content all season long. And let's get straight to it then. We have 6 tiers that we're going to discuss. We're going to go top to bottom. Let us know if you guys prefer bottom to top or top to bottom. Bottom to top might have more intrigue and mystery, but let us know what you guys think. We're going to try top to bottom here. In tier 1, we don't need to spend too much time on these guys. You know about these players. You've heard them talked about at nauseum at this point. Justin Jefferson, my wide receiver 1, my wide receiver 2, Tyreek Hill, and my wide receiver 3, Jamar Chase. That is my tier 1. These are all wide receivers that you fully anticipate averaging over 20 PPR points per game, connected to fantastic offenses that throw the ball a ton with quarterbacks that we really, really like. Any disagreements here?
The only disagreement I have is actually I have Cooper Kupp in my tier 2. He's my wide receiver 3. The only
in your tier 1?
In my tier 1, sorry, excuse me. In my tier 1, when healthy, yes, I know Cooper Kupp is in the air right now. When healthy, we know what he could do. Top 2 wide receiver in the first half of the season before his injury, averaging over 24 fantasy points per game. I think
22, yeah.
If he can stay healthy, which is the biggest question here, for me, he is my wide receiver 3 over Jamar Chase. He is the only real target on that team. Outside, if you had to compare it to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins,
I totally hear you. I have a rule pretty much if my first round pick is dealing with an injury, it's not my first round pick anymore. Like that's the way I kind of operate. It's like already going into the season, he's dealing with an injury, and I think it would be different if it was like slight ankle sprain, not a big deal, he'll be out a week. But to have a hamstring injury with Cooper Kupp being 30 years old. We know how aging wide receivers deal with hamstring injuries. The only thing that fixes it is time. And if you come back early, it's easily retweakable. So for that reason alone, I would personally not have Cooper Kupp in this tier. I would not consider him around those 3 wide receivers.
That's fair.
But just for the sake of agreeing, because we do have to meet, somewhere in the middle, I'd be happy to put him at the end of the tier 1.
That's fine.
But I would personally not consider him over these 3 wide receivers at this point. And you have to look we're talking about like the top 4 wide receivers in fantasy, the top 10. They're all good. You have to be critical. You have to find the small little reason not to take someone.
For sure.
So that would be the reason for me personally.
That's fair, and that's completely fair here. So I'm okay with that. Coming into tier 1, I can go in my tier 2 if you want. I can give you my first 4 players here. Sure. Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are my first 4 players in my tier 2. I do have one more in this tier.
Okay.
I think that's maybe where we would potentially disagree coming into tier 2.
Okay, yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Stephon Diggs, I've heard a lot of people say that he might not have the upside of the other people around him, but that he's safer. And I don't know, like, I understand the sentiment, but I think he does have wide receiver 1 upside. I truly think that's within the realm of possibilities for him. We're talking about a wide receiver who is connected to Josh Allen in one of the league's heaviest passing volume offenses. I don't believe that they added anyone serious to compete with him for targets. I know Dalton Kincaid is there. That concerns me more in Dynasty, but I don't have high expectations for Kincaid year 1. It's almost a lock that Stephon Diggs has 150 targets this year. It's almost a lock that he's averaging 10 targets a game, I feel, in that offense connected to Josh Allen. I think that the narrative that he's super safe, but he doesn't have the upside, I would slightly disagree with. So I'm with you. He is my wide receiver 5. CeeDee Lamb absolutely broke out last year. He was the wide receiver 5 on the year.
Exactly.
Brandon Cooks doesn't scare me. Michael Gallup doesn't scare me. I just think they make the offense more complete. And all this talk about the Cowboys are going to run the ball more. They're going to run the ball more. Are you sure about that? You sure?
We sure?
You sure about that?
Okay.
You just brought in a wide receiver. Dak was looking okay last year. You've been successful through the air. CeeDee Lamb's your best offensive weapon. You sure about that? Tony Pollard, I don't think he can carry the ball 25 times a game.
Okay.
And then A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, connected to great offenses, good quarterback play. I'm assuming the last person you have in this tier is Garrett Wilson.
That is correct. In my tier 2.
Yes. So I also have Garrett Wilson here. I just have him behind Davante Adams.
Yeah. That's where we see a difference.
And that is something that you and I have disagreed on pretty much the entire offseason. I have been on the train of, hey, I think people are overthinking Davante Adams. In the past 5 years, there's a real argument that he is the best wide receiver in all of fantasy football in that time span. Last year, he had 180 targets. I understand the notion that Derek Carr might be a slight downgrade to Jimmy G, or opposite way around when it comes to the long ball. But I just think the way that they get the ball into Davante Adams' hands is just going to change. You have a different quarterback. You're going to play the game a little bit differently. Regardless, Davante Adams is going to be peppered with targets. The biggest threat to him, in my opinion, was Darren Waller, who is no longer on the team. I think that Davante Adams is a lock for 160 targets. I don't see how he doesn't finish inside the top 12. And I know that you and I have made a bet on that. If he does finish top 12, you're going to eat some cinnamon on a live stream, spoonful. And if he finishes outside the top 12, then I will be. So I just think it's something that we've talked about a lot, and we just agree to disagree. I don't know if you have any thoughts that you want to share there.
Yeah. No, he's still my wide receiver 13. I think Davante Adams is a phenomenal talent. I just don't believe in Jimmy G, and I think that's my biggest conversation here. For the sake of time, yeah, he's still outside, and everything is going against my argument. I just don't see the consistency that we have seen with Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr of quarterback play from Jimmy G. So I think that's kind of where Davante Adams is gonna fall, not because he can't do it, it's because Jimmy G can't do it. So he is my wide receiver 13. He's technically in my tier 3. And I guess we can kind of talk about that if you want. My tier 3, my next guys, technically Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, and then Davante Adams. That's how my order is at this very moment.
Right. Yeah, I guess just to meet in the middle, I'd prefer to keep Davante Adams.
Yeah,
there.
That's fine. I
think he is well worthy of. I mean, honestly, there's a realistic chance that he finishes ahead of Wilson, Amon-Ra, AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb. Like, that's, in my opinion, that's very well within the realm of possibilities, purely because of the volume he's going to get. I mean, when you look at that team, if it's not Davante Adams, who is it? You know,
I agree.
Is Jacoby Myers going to be a top 15 wide receiver now? I mean, I don't know. I think Davante Adams is going to be peppered with targets. But I'm with you on the other players. You had Waddle, Olave, Smith. Who else do you have in this tier, or is that it?
That's all I have in my tier 3, actually. Obviously, with Devonta Smith, that's it's probably one of my smallest tiers here.
So I would add 2 players. One would be a wide receiver that, you know, I've been banging the drum for a long time on our Dynasty channel. You know this. Someone I'm all in on. He's an honorable mention, my guy. That is Calvin Ridley. I would have Calvin Ridley ahead of Devonta Smith. He's my wide receiver 13 as things currently stand. I am ahead of ADP, but I've mentioned this before on different videos. I believe he is the missing piece to unlock this ascending offense for them to become elite. You know, last year, I didn't see the Eagles being as good as they were offensively. And I think this year, that team, to me, is the Jacksonville Jaguars. People like them. They think they're good, but they don't realize the next step this team is about to take with healthy Travis Etienne in year 2, with Calvin Ridley being the wide receiver 1. That means Kirk is limited to a slot role. He moves down. Evan Ingram signs a long-term deal. I think that Calvin Ridley is going to absolutely pop off this year. Love his article in the Player Tribune. One thing that he said, which I didn't get to mention in our last video, is he was quoted and he said, I'm going to give everything to this city. If me and Trevor Lawrence are on the same team, I'm going to give Jacksonville 1,400 yards every single year. And I know it's just a player talking, but he has the passion. He's not lagging behind. The reports are good. He's worked out. He's got his body in a good shape. He's at top physical shape he's ever been in his life. He's the healthiest he's been. Last time he was a top 5 wide receiver, he had a broken foot in his bone. I just think Calvin Ridley is going to be an absolute nightmare for defenses this year, and I love him in fantasy. The other player that I would add, which I would argue that I don't think Devonta Smith and this other player should be in a separate tier, that is T. Higgins.
Okay.
I mean, when you look at Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, these are all wide receivers who are the number 2 on their team in very, very good offenses. Unless there's an injury to the guy ahead of them, it's very unlikely that they have the number one target share on their team. T. Higgins, on a per game basis, was just as good as Devonta Smith, if not better, last year. And I think a lot of that is a little bit skewed. Last year, we have Devonta Smith averaging 15 PPR points per game, T. Higgins averaging 14. But the difference is T. Higgins had multiple games where he played like a couple minutes in the first quarter, and then he left with an injury. That really impacted his per game averages. So to me, I think that what you're getting in Devonta Smith, you're getting in T. Higgins. I think their upsides are similar. They're on similar offenses attached to fantastic quarterbacks. I would argue that they need to be in the same tier myself.
Okay. Yeah, look, I have T. Higgins as my wide receiver 1, or the first wide receiver in my tier 4. So it's really minuscule. It's just a break here. So I'm happy to put T up.
Yeah.
I do see them finishing really close. That's why, once again, they're really back-to-back in my rankings. So, yeah, I completely agree. The only person I don't have in my tier 3 is Calvin Ridley. He is my wide receiver 17 at this moment. And he is in my tier 4. 2 players I would take over Calvin Ridley. What currently right now is Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper. Those are the 2 players. And obviously T. Higgins. Those were the guys that were ahead of him at this moment. In my rankings.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to back my guy.
No, that's fine.
If I'm going to go to bat for anyone, it would be Calvin to keep him there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy. I'm happy for that. It's not that big of a deal for me. I see.
We'll have to meet in the middle somewhere else. I'll have to give you something else as we go through the video.
Yeah.
But we'll head into tier 4. But just before we do that, if you guys want some solid rankings for the entire fantasy football season, then go ahead and use our code LAND when signing up to the Flock Fantasy website. There's a pinned comment with a direct link. If you sign up with our code, you'll get 30% off. Not only will you have best ball rankings, you'll have redraft rankings. You'll have rankings not only from us, but from Mason from Flock Fantasy, the guys from Fantasy In-Game, Fantasy Stock Exchange, Fantasy Domain. You get all of our articles. And if you sign up to the Mother Flocker tier, you're going to unlock a DM that we call the Fantasy Hotline, only for people on that tier supporting us. It's a DM where you can send us any sort of questions that you have. Hey, I just got this trade offer. What do you guys think about it? That kind of vibe. So DM us on Discord if you do sign up. We'd be happy to get you all set up. But here in tier 4, I'm with you. I got Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper there. Obviously, I've got Calvin a step ahead, but I'm a big fan of Keenan. I don't think that Quentin Johnson, I like Quentin Johnson. You love Quentin Johnson, right?
Yep.
But I don't think that means that Keenan Allen's ceiling is limited this year.
Agreed.
You look at last year, he spent a ton of time in the slot, and he was a wide receiver 3 from the time that he returned onwards on a per game basis. He was an absolute monster.
Yeah.
And I think if he stays healthy, he will be one of those guys that is bringing people into championships in week 15, 16, 17 of the year. And then Amari Cooper, who was an absolute steal in fantasy drafts last year with Jacoby Brissett. Now he gets a quarterback upgrade. He has been an alpha on different teams, the Raiders, the Cowboys. He's been top 10. He's been top 12. There's no reason that he can't do it here in Cleveland, now connected to Deshaun Watson, who has had D-Hop finish as a top 3 guy, who has had Will Fuller finish top 10. So I'm definitely with you on those 2 guys. Who else do you have here?
I also have a couple people, actually. So I also have DeAndre Hopkins. I know we're going to disagree on as well.
Ooh, okay, yeah, we do disagree there, but okay.
I also have Jerry Jeudy in this tier as well. Yep. And I also have Deebo Samuel in this tier. Not sure where you have him, but I also have Deebo in this tier, in my tier 4.
So, yeah, my next, the players that I have in this tier, I don't have D-Hop. We'll talk about him in a second.
Yeah, that's fair.
Would be Jerry Jeudy, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, and then Terry McLaurin. Those would be the wide receivers that I have left here in tier 4. DK Metcalf, I am a little bit lower on him than ADP, and that's purely because they just drafted my number 1 wide receiver in this year's class, JSN, and I think that will impact his target share. You were only sharing with 1 guy, now you're sharing with 2. I think that will have an impact. Deebo Samuel, still has the upside to become a top 10 wide receiver.
Agreed.
But obviously there's a lot of injury history, and there's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. Terry McLaurin, we don't know what's going to happen with Sam Howell. What we do know is that Terry's going to get his targets. He's going to get his opportunity. He might not be top 10, but even if we're looking at last year, reminder, Carson Wentz, Taylor Heineke, those are the quarterbacks that Terry's working with.
Yeah.
Finished as a wide receiver 14 last year. So I think, it's hard to say that Sam Howell's going to be some sort of downgrade. I don't think it can get much worse than those two guys outside of maybe the Indianapolis situation. But I have Jerry ahead of Deebo Samuel. Jerry Jeudy,
same.
I made it official. He is a my guy this year. Video coming out soon. I think that will be released after this video, so I won't say too much. He is a my guy this year. I'm very high on Jerry Jeudy. But yeah, I don't have D-Hop in this tier. Might have to meet you there though in the middle.
The person I don't have in this
tier, you meet me with Calvin. But go ahead.
The person I don't have in this tier is DK and Terry. Technically, I do have Terry in my tier 5 and DK in my tier 5. That's kind of where we see different. I still have, I think, only have 5 players in my tier 4: Keenan, Amari, Jerry, Deebo, and DeAndre Hopkins. So those are my 5 guys in my tier 4 coming into this year.
Well, if I had to choose between DK and Terry, I guess I will choose DK. But and then we'll bring DeAndre Hopkins up. I mean, like I mentioned, I'm quite low on DeAndre Hopkins. I know I'm not with consensus there. D-Hop is my wide receiver 26. Does this make him your wide receiver 20? Is that right?
Yeah, around
where
there.
He line up here?
What's this? Let me just count. Sorry, I don't have it. 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
Okay,
wide receiver 18.
So we have about 8 spots different in our rankings. Look, I like DeAndre Hopkins, but I just am someone who believes that Treylon Burks will be a more important part of this offense than people realize. D-Hop is going to have his games. Treylon's going to have his games, but I don't see this as like a Arizona situation where D-Hop is just getting 10 targets every single game, like unconsciously throwing him the ball. I don't see it that way. I don't think it's the same offense. That was an air raid offense. This offense will probably be built around Derrick Henry. And I think Treylon Burks, a lot of people are undervaluing how talented he is and the step that he will take this year. As much as I like D-Hop, he's just one of those players I'm going to be lower on this year. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I'll hold my hands up and say that I was.
Yeah. I mean,
but happy to put him in tier 4.
Yeah, exactly. I guess just to kind of advocate for him a little bit here in this tier. I agree. Yeah, this offense he's not going to be peppered with it, but I think there's going to be a lot more end zone opportunities specifically. And then also, it's not that Treylon Burks is not going to be irrelevant. This actually helps, DeAndre Hopkins maybe get a little bit more open hypothetically, because you have to stack the box there, and you can't forget about Treylon Burks, but then you also have DeAndre Hopkins, and DeAndre Hopkins is essentially QB proof. We have seen, I think, 12, 13, 14 quarterbacks we can name that DeAndre Hopkins has played with. Doesn't matter who he's playing with, he is going to get the ball and knows how to be fantasy relevant with any quarterback. So I'm really excited for D-Hop here.
I can respect it. All right, so we met in the middle there a little bit. If you guys want to see our individual rankings, those are over on the Flock Fantasy website. But let's go into tier 5 here. My first wide receiver would be Christian Watson.
Okay.
I have Terry one tier higher, but I'll just list off my tier and then we'll talk about it. Okay. Christian Watson, if Aaron Rodgers was the quarterback still, like Christian Watson would be probably ranked top 12 for me. The dude is a freak. There's 2 names that people consistently bring up: Chase Claypool, and the other side, which is kind of where I am.
Right.
What about DK Metcalf? Because after DK Metcalf's first year, people were kind of like, it's probably going to fall off. The athleticism is
right.
He's not going to grow as a route runner. Like, to me, Christian Watson is just bursting at the seams to become one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Everything is there. He just needs to become a better route runner. I mean, even the great Devontae Adams was not an elite route runner when he showed up to Green Bay. They know how to coach up wide receivers. I'm a big fan of Watson, and I think Jordan Love will be able to support him. But at this very moment, he's my wide receiver 22. I also have DJ Moore there. Big fan of DJ Moore, my wide receiver 23 this year.
Yep.
He is going to be the guy in Chicago. And a lot of people are out on DJ because they say, I don't want the number one in a small pie, a small, passing offense. To those people, I don't think they realize how big of a difference DJ Moore is going to be for this team and for what they can do. They will not be as limited as they were last year. Friendly reminder, the number one option on this team in target share percentage was Cole Kmet. The number 2 was Darnell Mooney, and he missed 5 games. DJ Moore makes everyone better on the team. He gives Justin Fields a legit weapon. And you still have Mooney as a deep threat. You have Cole Kmet over the middle of the field. You have Chase Claypool, who's a deep ball threat in his own right. DJ Moore is going to get a ton of work, and I think this team is going to pass the ball a lot. They will be the most improved offense through the air this year. If you're looking at just purely yardage through the air per game. Drizzy Drake London, I would have here as well. The question's never been the talent. The question is, what the hell is Desmond Ridder going to do?
Exactly.
You know, like, what is Ridder going to give us? I would also have Brandon Ayuk there. You know, honestly, the more I think about it, I might be moving Brandon Ayuk up because I was a little bit hesitant and worried about what would Brandon Ayuk look like if it was Trey Lance. But now that it feels like it's pretty confidently going to be Brock Purdy, I think I have more confidence in Ayuk.
I agree.
And then the last player in this tier for me would be Chris Godwin, who, you know, I've been pretty well out, and it's been pretty well documented. I've been out on these Bucs wide receivers. The reason I'm in on Godwin is because I think he is the one that's least impacted. We don't know Baker as some sort of efficient deep ball thrower, right? But can he get the ball over the middle of the field in simple slants, simple routes? Chris Godwin is a dominant wide receiver over the middle of the field. So I think he could end up being a value. He's my wide receiver 27 at this very moment. So it's not like I'm completely in on him. But, man, he is so freaking talented. And he, in my opinion, will be what the passing offense is built around because it suits Baker's strengths, whereas Baker's not going to be throwing, like, you know, 5 to 10 deep balls a game to Mike Evans.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
That's what my tier 5 looks like.
No, that's fair. Look, for me, our tiers are completely different right now, okay? So, once again, for time's sake, but the people that I have in my tier 5, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, Christian Watson, DK Metcalf, Terry, Deontay Johnson, I also have in my tier 5, who we haven't spoken about. And then maybe let's talk about him, since I guess I can kind of advocate. There's two people I really want to advocate for to be in my tier 5. Deontay Johnson coming in, obviously 140-plus targets this past year. Kenny Pickett stepping up, and I truly believe this offense. I have a massive belief in this Steelers offense with Kenny Pickett going into his second year in this team. I believe he's going to score. One of the biggest advocates or caveats with Deontay Johnson is that he didn't score a touchdown this past year. Though 4 or 5 touchdowns, he would have been a top 22 wide receiver, and I think that is the biggest difference here. I do believe in George Pickens, but I still believe in Deontay Johnson. Now, my other player in this tier, which I know we're going to completely disagree with, and that is Elijah Moore. We don't have to have him here. It doesn't necessarily matter, but you guys know, if you've been following this channel, you know how much I love Elijah Moore and what he is going to be bringing to this offense for the Cleveland Browns. The connection that we've seen, take it with a grain of salt, in preseason and in training camp, the hype we've seen around him. I cannot picture a world where Elijah Moore he finished outside the top 30 coming into this year. It's really hard to even imagine. I even have him in my top 26 wide receivers right now. So that's where I have in my tier 5. Once again, we don't have to have that, but just wanted to advocate for both of those guys because they are in my tier 5. The only difference here that I don't have is Chris Godwin. He is in my tier 6.
Okay. All right, well, then let's advocate for one person each. I'll advocate for Godwin, and you choose between Deontay and
Elijah Moore.
Okay, so we'll bring Elijah Moore up. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say it's not going to happen for Elijah Moore. The only thing I would combat that is if you said guaranteed top 30.
I said it's hard not to envision him being a top 30 wide receiver. That's really difficult to if that happens, he must have gotten injured. Deshaun Watson must have gotten injured, or we were just completely bamboozled by everything that happened. Genuinely.
So the reason I said top 30 is because you now have to tell me that one of these guys is going to be less valuable than Elijah Moore. Michael Pittman, Christian Kirk, Tyler Lockett, Jahan Dotson, Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Godwin, Mike Williams, Mike Evans, Hollywood Brown. You know, like, in order for him to sneak in there, he's got to be more valuable than these names. I'm not sure. I'm not as high on as him as you. I see what you're talking about. I see the pathway. I mean, he definitely has that ceiling. But where you're saying I don't see a way it doesn't happen, I'm personally saying, like, I would be impressed if it did happen. And I see that ceiling. I'm just a little bit more hesitant on it just being a complete lock that it does happen.
You have to look at,
but to each their own.
Yeah, and I think the crazy thing is you have to compare it to where he's going now. Like if I'm not mistaken, on multiple platforms, he's like the wide receiver 43. If I'm not mistaken, the underdog, he's a wide receiver 43 right now. If you were to look at it, it's hard.
So I mean, I'm higher than consensus. He's my wide receiver 39.
Yeah, and it's hard not to see, especially with the quarterback play in some of these teams. And I'm not saying these rookies can't surpass him. I have him, couple picks behind him. But I can envision, Tyler Lockett dropping back with Jackson Smith and Jigba. Same thing with Christian Kirk, with Calvin Ridley, especially with Michael Pittman, with Anthony Richardson. We're all saying that this year one with the quarterbacks. Chris Godwin with Baker Mayfield. Same thing with Hollywood Brown. When is Kyler Murray coming back? And I think I have a lot. I know I have a lot more confidence in Elijah Moore than those players right now going into the season with this situation, especially with Deshaun Watson, who has proven to, commit these wide receivers or produce these top wide receivers with DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, and obviously Brandon Cook. So it's hard, once again, not to see him finishing within the top 30.
So, you have Elijah Moore over Godwin.
Oh, yes, I do.
Ah, man.
I do.
I'm struggling to wrap my head around it, but I'm with you, man. I'm with you as far as, like, I think he will have a breakout season. I really do. I'm ahead of ADP. But where do you see 4 spots ahead of ADP? You're like 20 spots ahead of ADP.
Yeah, I am. I'm
so it's a big call.
It is a big call, and it's a bold take sure.
I think his ceiling is like a top 25 finish, but I think his floor is like a top 40.
Okay.
So I think the floor is much lower than what you think. Like I said, I see the ceiling, but in your conversations, you're saying I don't see how he doesn't finish. Top 30. So that's where we just see different. I can see a way it doesn't happen. I mean, to be fair, we talk about all the success that Deshaun Watson's had with his wide receivers. It's not been the wide receiver 2. It's not D-Hop and enter wide receiver 2.
I guess
it's not Will Fuller and the second guy on the team. So I don't know. I mean, it could be Elijah. It could be.
It could be.
Who knows?
It could be. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, look, I can talk about this. I can make this a whole video where we just have a conversation about Elijah Moore for 20 minutes. But for the sake of time, Deontay Johnson is also in my tier 5, which we have talked about being in the tier 6. I guess we can kind of talk about the players in tier 6 now. I guess I can kind of start that off. I do have Jordan Addison right now ahead of Jackson Smith and Jigba. I
have them back to back. Yeah, but I do have JSN one spot higher.
They are back to back. I just have Jordan ahead of Jackson right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, both of these guys are great picks. Addison, actually, again, not officially seen yet, but he will be a My Guy this year. That video will be coming out soon. So I'm all in with you. I'm definitely ahead of consensus. He is, to me, Jordan Addison's one of the biggest steals in drafts right now, across ESPN, Sleeper, and Underdog. But yeah, I'm with you there. I wouldn't have Elijah Moore there, but again, give me Jordan Addison over a lot of guys that people are valuing. Michael Pittman I have here, Christian Kirk, and then Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, exactly. I have Chris Godwin as my last player there. I just don't believe in that Bucs offense personally. He is my last player in my tier 6, but everything else is pretty the same. Actually, I have Christian Kirk, ahead of Michael Pittman, just one spot. Okay. But other than that, it doesn't really matter. However way you guys want to put it and envision that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and how much time do we have left?
We have just under a minute.
Okay, I'll just quickly say on Michael Pittman Jr., I've been out for quite some time since they drafted Anthony Richardson. What I will say is if you look at his quarterback play over the last 2 years, it's been genuinely putrid, and he's put up decent fantasy performances.
Right.
So there is a scenario, it's unlikely, that purely based off of volume, because he'll be the number one, that he could be a steal. We'll see. Risky pick. But anyway, do us a favor, drop a like to show some love. Subscribe if you like fantasy football, and we will see you in the next one. And look out for my Guys video coming out very soon. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.